everybody. Thank you for coming, and it's very nice to see you in Miami. We're very excited to be here. So my name is Nkiru Balonwu, and I'm the creative director at Africa Soft Power Project. I'm just going to very quickly sort of like tell you a little bit about Africa Soft Power and what we're trying to do with it, and then we're just going to go straight into the panel. So we started Africa Soft Power Project during COVID. I know it's still COVID, but during COVID, the beginning. This was around, I think, May 20, just before the proper lockdown started, or just after the lockdown started. And I was in Lagos. Lots of things were happening. People were having major issues. We had people that had cancer and all sorts of things going on apart from COVID. And how you start bonding, and there's the quiet time, and you just start thinking, what are you going to do with your time? Because there's all of these things, and there's all this mental, just everybody here knows what was happening. So we started because there were so many conversations around who we were, who we are, what we're about as Africans in diaspora, as Black people generally. The beginning of the story was that as Africans, we haven't actually connected with African Americans or Africans in Brazil, and it sort of seemed like we're very isolated, and COVID sort of like showed that we were not. And so we started this project. We tried to get people. It was about art. It's about how do you use the culture and knowledge, creative power, art, film, to sort of propel the Africa story differently. All the stories that were coming out were about, how things were so, how the West was saying, like, Africa is going to be the worst hit in COVID, and we're all going to die, and what are we going to do about these poor Africans? So we're like, okay, so what do we do? So we started these conversations, and what was interesting about the COVID experience was that we were able to reach so many people quickly. So normally people that would be a year to reach them, we would call and they would say yes, we would do it. So we reached really, what you normally call important people. And we started having conversations. And it went really, really well. And people started asking us, can you have more conversations? And we're having conversations around film, around food, music, Afrobeat. Being Black in Brazil was something that we had conversations about, because when we talk about the Black experience, we usually talk about maybe being African or being Black American. We don't usually talk about being, from South America and the Black experience there, and we've had quite a lot of conversations about that. And so fast forward, we're here today. This is our first physical event since we started, and it's very exciting to be here in Miami. This is our first outing at Art Basel, and it's a conversation around art and African art, and what is African art, sort of, But just before that, I wanted to say a very quick thank you to our speakers. Particularly, I want to start with Hannah. Hannah is that woman that when you're getting in a fight, so you pick her, right? Because there's some people you don't pick when there's a fight. So she's that one you pick because she won't ask questions. She'll just jump. And then when you're done fighting, she's like, what are we fighting about exactly? And so that's Hannah. She's like, since we met, she's been like one of those people, she's just a believer. And when she says she's going to do something, she just does it. And I think it's the same experience. That's why we have Touria, Franklin, and Oti. Literally, I was just saying to Franklin that people have been saying, how did you get Franklin? Like, he's so hard to get. I'm like, he's hard to get. Oh, well, we just found him now. Like, because he's just been he's been available. He's made himself like, those people that you're so surprised when you reach them and they just say, of course. That's the experience we've had with Franklin and with Touria and with Oti. Everybody just said, of course. And that's also the experience we've had with Africa Soft Power in terms of, I think it's just a timing, the timing of the building connections. I think that's what it is that makes it really interesting and special. So thank you, everybody, for being here. There's one last thing I did want to talk about before we go into the panel. It's about, two things, actually. So we have African Americans saying, why should we be interested in the Africa Soft Power Project? We're not Africans. And this is a big debate. We know it's been a debate that's been raging since time. And for us, the story is, I get that. I get that. I have lived here and I get what you mean. But it's also important, when someone says, go back to your shithole country without knowing where you're from, just because of the color of your skin. So the point is, if Africa does well, black people everywhere do well. And so that's why it's not these Africans and this, African Americans and these people from South America. It's really just, if the continent does well, it's in all our best interests. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And then the other thing is, we lost somebody recently. People have lost many people. But Virgil Abloh was inspirational. Like the real, like when you talk about African, the global African, the African experience, the sending the message out to the world, the Black American, the just general global citizen that he was. And for such a young person, we've all lost people. But I wanted us to just take a minute, just 1 minute, and stand up for just a minute, quiet prayer for Virgil and his family. May he rest in peace. So thank you, everybody, and welcome again. And so again, we have kuli, we have plantain chips, and we're going to have hors d'oeuvres after this session. I'm just going to, so my moderating is not going to be deep. It's just going to be, these are like powerful people. We're just going to, have them introduce themselves, and I'll just tell you what we're doing. So we're sort of splitting it into, because I know people have really important places to go to, and we're very grateful to have your time. So 3 parts. So today, which is, the past. So talking about yourself, where you came from to this point, your experience with art, African art, Black art, art in Black society. So that's your past to now, the present. What's your experience with the present that we're living in? What's your experience of the past 2 years, good and bad? And then the future. What are the challenges that you're seeing? But actually, even more important than challenges, what is this thing that's making you excited? What's exciting you about, being here in Miami today? What's exciting you about, art generally, about Black people and art, about African art? And also feel free to sort of chime in about, what you think about repatriation, what's happening, returning the Benin bronzes, all the conversations. We don't need the details. It's just really, the conversations around that. So I'm going to start with you, Hannah, and just everybody just chime in. We're not going to ask questions. So like, this is your living room. Just sort of like run with it, and let's see how we go. Thank you.
Thanks, Nkiru. This is not my living room. It's far from it. I'm really excited to be here, excited to meet many of you. Also so happy to see so many familiar faces. I didn't expect to see so many friends, old friends and colleagues in Miami. I wanted to add something. When Nkiru came to me and said, who should we have on the panel? And I said, who are you thinking of? She did open with, well, what about Obama and Oprah? But I think we did better, actually. I think this panel have a little bit more to say about African art than Obama and Oprah, but maybe next time. My name is Hannah O'Leary. I am the head of modern and contemporary African art at Sotheby's. I'm a director there in London. I have been working with Sotheby's for 5 years in that field, and before that I was working with Bonhams for 10 years. I was one of the founders of the first international sales of African art. I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm the only person on the panel who is not in any way African, but I have dedicated my life and my career to the arts and artists of Africa. We have 2 auctions a year in London in March and October, and we sell more African and African diaspora art than any other company. So I'm very, very proud of that fact, and that's really accelerated in the last 5 years since I've been there. But of course, that's just part of the story, part of the ecosystem. I'm going to leave it there. I think we should pass it over.
Hey, thank you, Nkiru. Thank you for having me. But that's the problem. Like when you said, what the topic is, there's too many reasons why to say yes, and so I'm going to apologize now because I'm going to run it like right after 4. But that's really the thing. Like I want to say a bunch of things, so I'm going to try not to say too much because these opportunities only come but so often. And in some ways, this is a pickup as well for us because Hannah and I did a panel together at the museum maybe 2 years ago, and OT was there, and we were talking, and Touria, we had a group at 154 from the museum just 2 years ago in London. So you know, it only makes sense. You can't say no, actually. Obama would have been nice, but it's not too bad. And I just want to touch on just a few points. I grew up in New York. I'm looking at Ali Tashkabede, who I've known since I was quite young. And I grew up around art, so I grew up around the context. Like you talked about, the context between the African American and the diaspora. It was, for me, it was always a diaspora conversation. It was never anything but that. For instance, Ed Clark, right? My context of encountering the abstract paintings of Ed Clark is in the context of Eric Robertson living right down the street and buying and selling African art and being an expert on African art. So the first time I saw a room full of Norman Lewis, it was a room full of Norman Lewis, but there was African art from West Africa, there was African art from probably a little bit of Central African, and that was the context. It was never one or the other. And so there's that. And I also just want to mention in this context, because we only get these opportunities once in a while, but in thinking about that own personal history and then wider histories that bring us here today and why today is so important, is that in 1997 I was living in Milan and was invited to go to Johannesburg for the 97 Johannesburg Biennial. It was only the second biennial that had happened in Johannesburg. Of course, that hasn't lived on so much at the moment, but shout out to Okwi Enwezer, who did that exhibition and made a point of thinking about things in the past like Festac and saying, okay, this is where everybody is going to come together, and they made sure that everybody came. It wasn't about those who were interested in the work. It wasn't about those who knew something about African art. It was international contemporary art, period. You had to be there. It was bigger, I'd say, for many of us, it was way bigger than what happens that same year, which is one of those years in 97 that you had the Venice Biennial, you had Sculpture Project in Munster, you had Documenta in Kassel, whatever. This show was way more important than all of those conversations. So I just wanted to say that. And being here as director of the Perez Art Museum Miami, I feel very fortunate in that I walked into an institution that had a fund for black art, or a fund for African American art, actually, which brings your point again, because in this last year of consideration during COVID and about making explicit, and I think this is one of the challenges, is continuing to make explicit the ties that bind us, not the ties that keep us apart, but how we are as a diaspora. So with that in mind, we changed the name of the fund this year to the Fund for Black Art, trying to just situate that. And then lastly, there's a lot of African art, I'd say, that you're seeing in the fairs this year, which is interesting, and Rubel Museum as well. But we also have an exhibition up called Allied with Power, which is 37 different artists from the diaspora. And you also mentioned this, because what we tried to do is touch on the fact that the diaspora from the lens of Miami is one that is heavily involved in Cuba, one that is heavily involved in Brazil. So you have many artists that are from those places. For Tomas Esson, I just want to shout him out because he is a Miami-based artist, Afro-Cuban. Maria Magdalena Campos Pons, who we just gave our Perez Prize to as well, is a part of that show. And so I'll leave it there.
Okay, my name is Touria Glaoui. I'm the founding director of 154 Contemporary African Art Fair. I guess I started in art because my dad was an established artist of Morocco. So I guess I was born within, a lot of art around me, and this is probably where I got my first art education, being raised in Morocco. I started 154 in 2013. The landscape was completely different. To find African art, African diasporan art, it was not at all that easy. We were talking about maybe one exhibition every 5 years, in a big museum, etc. And I thought, the fairs being, probably where you had the most important access for artists to be sold to collectors, to institutions, to have those connections, in terms of network, etc., that it was, mainly the most important thing to do in terms of models, like to give them access to this international global stage by doing a fair. And just to give you a bit of those numbers, when we are Art Basel today, where I was able to count, really 10 galleries with actually proper African show at the fair. When I was working those fairs, it was around 0.05% of artists of African descent, in those fairs. So the landscape, again, as I said, has very, change, I think, tremendously. And I think what is very interesting is that we're approaching our 10 years of anniversary of the fair. There's an edition in New York, in London, and in Marrakesh now, but I guess what we see today in Art Basel make us also having to rethink what we'll be doing in the next 10 years, you know, because we need to continue to be relevant. I don't know if the art fair model is the best model now to be able to do those, you know, Africa a favor as well, because I see more integration, more inclusion, which is very exciting. So we are approaching our 10-year anniversary. We're very open to brainstorming about how we can be more relevant to Africa and African artists.
Hey everybody, my name is O.T. Roberts. I'm from Nigeria. In this context, I'm going to be saying we a lot, and when I say we, I'm actually standing here, or sitting here, as an avatar for my wife Remy, who's over there. So we speak with one voice, we collect with one voice. You know, in growing up, you know, we both lived kind of all over, kind of as a result of what was happening, you know, back home. So, you know, our parents were part of a contingent that left the continent, left the country. So, you know, I spent some time in the Middle East, in Europe. Remy and I actually lived in Saudi Arabia when we were kids, and reconnected in Miami, which is interesting after you know, freshman year. Of course, she had a boyfriend. We had to do something about that. But you know, when we think about, you know, first of all, Nkiru, what you're doing is amazing, right? Because this is, you know, this is what's needed. When you think about kind of the art ecosystem, like we're all a part of the art ecosystem. You know, collectors, artists, institutions, you know, curators, we're all part of the ecosystem. And for us, you know, being away from home, there was this, you know, there's this bridge, this gap where we felt, you know, how do we kind of bridge this gap? How do we preserve, you know, the culture that we know and that we grew up with, you know, for ourselves, for our friends, for our children, you know, and all different kind of modalities, whether it's, you know, Afro beats, whether it's our fashion, like Nkiru is modeling perfectly fine over here, or art, you know, and particularly, you know, our directive is to focus on African diaspora type art because, you know, we love figurations, we love, you know, kind of the self-portraiture work that we see because, you know, we want that kind of representation to be shown in its power and its purity, you know, for our children, for people to visit our home, you know, and to see that, you know, these people, these artists, us, we have a voice in the society today. So that kind of is what started it for us. And then, you know, in trying to kind of learn and being involved in the ecosystem, you know, relationships were super important. And there's people here that have, you know, when I think about what Remy and I have been able to do that have been super helpful in that, you know, even in, you know, like Trixie over there has been, you know, terrific in helping us connect with artists back home in Nigeria. Meeting Franklin here, you know, in Miami. Franklin is, you know, is what we call like the plug, you know. So Franklin knows everybody. It's just incredible. Everywhere we go, like, do you know Franklin? It's like, yes, we know Franklin. We love Franklin, you know. And he introduced us to Hannah a couple of years ago. And since then, Hannah and I have been in touch, and she's been doing, you know, I kind of joke sometimes with my friends. I feel like Hannah's more African than I am. But in doing this, you know, and bringing us all together, just as I was sitting down here, I was telling Nuri how wonderful it is to meet her because my wife and I were lucky to get a piece by an artist named Alexis Pesquin, who is an Afro-French artist who is represented by a gallery named October Gallery, which is in her fair. So this is kind of all full circle. So I'm, you know, look, we're delighted to be here. I'm curious also to learn from each of you and all of you, you know, in terms of what we feel are kind of the challenges that continue to persist in this space and what we can do, whether it's through what Nkiru is doing or together, to bridge those gaps and kind of form one voice. That's my intro. Sorry if I went too long, but.
Yeah, so no, actually that's great. And I think we don't want to sort of spend too much time talking because, here, everybody here is sort of like a specialist in one way or the other. We have like people who are like specialist chefs. We have like Smooth who's here. We have Ludlow who's here. We have Claude who's here. Like loads of people who are here are actually specialists. So it's also be great to sort of like hear you, like have you say something, whatever you want to say. But again, it would be good to sort of talk about the present. Like how has COVID, the past 2 years, what's the experience for you in the past 2 years? Because this is a generalist conversation. I'm a minor art collector. I'm minor, very minor. So, and I'm not a specialist. So my questions cannot be specialist. It's just really for us, art is about engaging power. How do we engage as Black people? How do we engage ourselves? But how do we as Black people also like understand, art? Like, how we have a lot of young people calling us and saying, oh, we want to start collecting. And this is especially young Black boys. We want to start collecting, but we don't know anything about it. So how do we learn? What is it to learn? What should we be looking for? What's the experience we're about? Like maybe talk about that and also talk about how that sort of like impacted in the past 2 years. And then if you can, maybe if anybody's interested, I'm interested, maybe if you can, NFTs a little bit because I don't know anything about it. Like this is really a generalist conversation, but we're just trying hard in terms of let me just get some information from the experts. Like, what is this NFT thing? Should we be getting into it? Because I missed out on blockchain or cryptocurrencies. I'm like, am I missing out on this as well? Or are we missing out? Like generally just sort of like whatever you like. And in case anyone in the audience wants to say something, please feel free as well. So, Hannah?
Sure, I'll jump in. Touria mentioned it earlier. When I started my career, there were very few places that you could access art from Africa. It really wasn't on people's radars. There was one, it's already been mentioned, the October Gallery in London was about the only gallery that represented artists from Africa. When we started our sales at Bonhams in 2006, they were really quite small and focused on collectors on the continent, which I'm still focused on today. But it's exciting to be here in this room because actually it's a category that is of global interest. Since I joined Sotheby's in 2016, our auctions have had a very wide reach. I think we've had bidders from over 50 countries on 6 continents. The buyers tend to be, or the bidders tend to be split quite evenly between the Americas, Europe and Africa, with a growing contingent from Asia as well. So it really is of international interest. And really the thing that combines what I sell at Sotheby's is these artists might originate from Africa, but they are world-class international contemporary artists. The last 2 years obviously have been a challenge, but have been incredibly rewarding as well in terms of market sales. They're up. We had our 2 most successful years to date. And I think that plays into the story of this broad, the broad appeal of this market. We were never really focused on buyers in London. And so while it was heartbreaking to close our doors and not be able to welcome the world into our exhibitions, historically we really had been selling a lot online anyway. And from JPEGs, from thankfully our clients having gone to institutions like PAM, having gone to fairs like 154 and familiarizing themselves with these names and these pieces. And so we were able to transition to an online model quite smoothly, especially when the kind of pandemic dictated that. What I'm really excited about today is that, and of course Nkiru, the pandemic's what brought us together as well. And as you said, we were suddenly able to engage in these global conversations. We at Sotheby's were able to put on a talks program where we had the Duke of Devonshire in conversation with Kehinde Wiley. And the Duke of Devonshire was talking from his drawing room in Chatsworth House in the north of England. And Kehinde was joining us from Senegal. I know a lot of people in this room know Kehinde, and they know he's hard to get hold of. He is hard to get on a plane and commit to an event. And so this pandemic actually made us all sit still, and we were able to draw these international conversations together. And I really enjoyed that, being able to take part in these kind of dream panels where you had a speaker in Paris, a speaker in France, or in New York, a speaker in London. So there were lots of great things that came out of a very difficult situation. at the same time, I'm really excited to be here and to be at a fair in Miami, which is bringing together so many people from around the world that is, like you've already mentioned, representing more African art and more diversity than ever before. I think Miami has always paved the way in that front, and Franklin, you know, this is why I've always kind of been very happy to come here, because I think that it is a global or a multicultural city, and that's reflected in your institutions here, which I find really exciting.
I'd only add that, the period really, just to take stock, I mean, the time to slow down and think about how to be impactful, the importance of silver linings can't be overstated. I think when the pandemic first came on, we were supposed to have the Jean-Michel Basquiat show about hip-hop and its relationship to painting that ended up at the Boston MFA, but it was largely built around Basquiat. And I've always felt and known that how can we not do a bigger exploration of his work here in this place, for all of the obvious reasons. I mean, born in Brooklyn to a Puerto Rican mother and a Haitian father, artist who obviously is looking at Africa in a global way and always did. It made perfect sense. But of course, because of the pandemic, we could not get the show to come here. We were also attempting to have a kind of conversation that would envelop the post-World War II period to the present by combining our exhibition that's up now, Allied with Power, which really is quite contemporary. I think all of the work was made at least within the last 10 years, but it was supposed to be paired with an exhibition that was traveling of the work of from the collection of Pamela Joyner and Fred Jafrida, which would have given us a bridge between a more abstract a group of artists who were working abstractly, but specifically looking at Africa in that conversation, like Ed Clark, like Al Loving, like William T. Williams. But of course, we lost that show as well. So it gave us time to then think, how do we do things? How do we continue to program and be relevant within this moment? And of course, that meant being digital and doing things like having Njideka Crosby in conversation online, or having David Ajay in conversation online from his studio in Accra. And so we were able to kind of pivot and do some things like that. And likewise, to think about what can be impactful in the future. And so I'm really looking forward to what will be our first Fund for Black Art and Soul celebration on February 5, and thinking about the ways in which we really took the time to sit around, both at a staff level and a board level, and make a consideration of something that seems small in some sense, a name change, but one that really has an import in terms of championing the diaspora and trying to suggest a level of community that we hope will be meaningful in the future.
Yes, so I mean, we were a bit worried with the with the COVID, I have to say. I mean, we are an event, organization, so having people mingle, come to an event, discover art, was obviously impossible. So we had to cancel 2 shows, in 20 and 2021. But we had also the opportunity to develop, weekly, webinars, different, players of the contemporary art world, which was very interesting. And I think we had a very nice group of followers, as well, during this first lockdown. I think, we were quite lucky in terms of how it impacted us as well, because we were able to manage probably one of the only fair at the end of 2020 in October, and just because we had that opening before it closed, it closed down again, and then we were able to explore a new city. We did the fair in Paris as well, so we had the chance to explore our relationship with local Parisian collectors and French collectors who couldn't see any art because all the museums were closed, etc. So we suddenly took a central place in France, which we never had before. So that was very exciting for us to be able to be in a new city and not lose, this time without being to do a show. And for us, it was very important as well because because a lot of our artists are quite new in the market. A lot of our galleries are quite new in the market, and a lot of people, you know, maybe around the world, in the US or Europe, had waiting lists for some of their artists. But for, you know, some of the artists who were really new and getting into the market, a lot of the collectors did not know about them, you know. So having a physical fair was a really good way to introduce those artists, you know, to different collectors around the world. And I mean, we adapted like everyone else, you know, having online, you know, version of the fair, etc. But we were very happy to be able to physically run fair as well, even if they were smaller, even if they were, because some of the galleries, you know, had not had the chance to build a collectors list, you know, to sell to those collectors. So all the online, you know, platforms were extremely important at that time, you know, for artists, for you know, galleries, you know, and it was a great avenue to sell art. I mean, today, I mean, we're extremely happy to be back and still, you know, preparing our show with all the different limitations. So our next show is Marrakesh. We are now dealing with a country who has closed its borders, you know, and we don't know when it's going to open again. So we are, you know, really trying to be better in organizing those events in less amount of time and having backup plans, you know, as soon as we know that we can't do a show or we have to find another solution. But the COVID had led us to great things as well, to collaboration. Sorry, because I have Sotheby's with Anna here, but we were able to collaborate with Christie's and, you know, have them share, you know, but it's true, like, you know, any avenue at this point was a very good avenue. And to be honest, Christie's in that particular point, you know, shared also their collector base with us, you know, during the COVID, which really helped in supporting the fair and continuing in helping us continue to exist. But this is where we were in those 2 years. So now we're hopefully preparing a more interesting 2022 and maybe less obstacle. We never know. But now we prepared for any eventuality.
Indeed. You know, I'll say from you know, our perspective as collectors, I mean, it was a very obviously challenging time for everybody, but you know, going through this kind of, you know, that, you know, remote / virtual period, you know, and I remember Franklin's conversation with Angelica Crosby. That was great, and she's one of Remy and I's favorite artists. You know, in utilizing the online platforms or social media platforms, or let's say like an Instagram, for instance, it kind of, you know, it democratizes the access to some of these artists. Like, for instance, through some of these platforms, you're able to connect with an artist who is, you know, in a township in South Africa, or another artist in some remote village in Ghana, you know, where, you know, ordinarily, you know, sometimes it's difficult to, you know, gain relationships with, you know, with some of these people or curators. You know, for instance, one of the guests here today, you know, Destiny from Ross Sutton. I mean, she is a superstar, and we were able to connect through Instagram, and she does amazing work and has great relationships with artists. So, you know, during this time, from our perspective, I think we're able to, you know, gain, you know, better access, connect more with some of the artists or people behind the artists, kind of diving more kind of into that ecosystem. And I think it's helped us kind of launch into where we are today. Ultimately, you know, we're continuously looking to engage and learn and meet new people along the way. But, you know, it's interesting when there's a challenge. I want to speak from a Miami perspective, you know, during when COVID first happened, and obviously it was a very scary time. And my day job, I'm in finance, so like the equity markets, you know, every day, every week there was establishing, you know, new floors. You know, it was a very scary time. Once that leveled out a little bit, you know, and I don't want to speak politics, but for whatever reason, everybody thought Miami kind of was the place to go. So Miami really kind of blew up across all areas and all avenues. And a lot of people, were coming here and recognizing its destination or its place as a kind of a multicultural city, like Hannah alluded to. And as a result, from a collector standpoint, we're able to meet more people that we ordinarily wouldn't have had access to. So certainly has been a challenging time, but on the flip side, it has been extremely exciting. And to Touria's point, we're looking forward to a greater 2022.
So thanks for that. Before we because I have to start rounding up, but before we do that, in terms of what's next and what are you excited about? I just thought it'd be nice to actually speak to people in the audience and just take comments. You're going to say something about NFTs. We have Smoot who hopefully will say something, and Ludlow and whoever else.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Rolowan Salam. I'm a founder of a company in the metaverse called The Coolest Company. And I kind of just wanted to share information about NFTs as it relates to art. NFTs are basically, think of them like MP3s. They're not the actual song, it's just a digital package that carries the media. So that's essentially what an NFT is. And it's the stuff that will populate this new internet that's coming called the metaverse. I know it sounds crazy. It's like me telling you in 1992 what the internet was. You wouldn't be able to say it. And a new age is approaching, a digital age. We've actually reached technological singularity. So the way NFTs can work in art, so most people right now, I'm sure you probably heard the term, you just see the photos, but it's way bigger than that. The NFT holds the media. And the media is what everyone is saying, oh, that's just a JPEG, that's just a photo, that's just a photo. But the real NFT package has something more incredible in it, metadata. Relative metadata and structural metadata. And now you can package data like GPS in the metadata, and now you can geolocate art. It gets that crazy. NFTs are profound, profound technological advancement in humanity. And everyone in this room should embrace it, especially Africa, because it will give us equal leverage.
Thank you so much. Again, my brain cells just don't seem to work. I don't know. They've explained it to me so many times, and it's just not picking up what should I do? I don't know, because it's not functioning when it comes to this NFT. I feel like I'm missing out on something, but please go ahead. I'll bring it to you.
I feel like the more important element about it is that Black people in general don't want to miss the boat when it comes. I just feel like the more important element to NFTs is that Black people in general don't want to miss the boat. They don't want to get on too late. They don't want to miss out on opportunities, because it's the tech component of it is something that sometimes might confound people, or and if that is the case, then is there an entire group of people, continent of people that could miss out on opportunities? And even when Jay-Z did something with NFTs in the beginning, some say there was an opportunity to make more money, and they lost out because they weren't as up to speed. Now, I don't want to say that I'm that knowledgeable about it, but all I'm trying to say is that that's something that our people don't want to miss out on.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody have comments to add?
I have a comment. We were able to present our first NFT at 154 this year, and it was what was very interesting for us to be able to have this Nigerian artist called Sinashi, present his NFT. Was that we're actually not catching up, and there was a huge pool of NFT artists that live on the continent that are ready, to be part of this world, So it's very exciting because we are there already, taking action and presenting and selling at auctions.
Yes, thanks. I'm not going to talk about NFTs. But yeah, my name is Ludlow Bailey, and I'm really, really super excited about this event. Welcome, and I hope this is not going to be the last time. But as a self-proclaimed global African, because that's how I see myself. I don't really define myself based on where I was born, but as a person who is really more on a spiritual journey, to be African is a special thing. And I think that art is one of those areas that can allow us to sort of recognize the totality of who we are as a people. And I think it's very important to have us coming together in the diaspora and talking about, because I agree with you 100%, if Africa is not successful, it's going to impact the lives of black people everywhere. Because when you think of the reality is that we're now 1.6 billion people, African people on the planet, right? And yet the way we're treated is really not on par. Right? So to do these things is important. And it's also important to have a broader audience, because one of the things I think is true is the real narrative of the world is really humanity started in Africa. And so we've actually made a significant contribution to world civilization, which is not being recognized in general. But now, I think through art, that's coming back into the fore, right? So it's an opportunity, I think, also to bring to the Basel audience, because this is a pretty global audience, a narrative that speaks to the truth of who we are, and also celebrates what we're doing. Because I see that black people are going through a renaissance on the planet, and the art they're producing is one example of that. So with that said, welcome again. Hannah, always good to see you. Welcome to Miami. Frank, we see you all the time. So,
Thank you. So, comments from anybody else? We're going to start rounding up because it's the hour. We're going to take smooth. Hey.
I mean, this is not necessarily a comment. By the way, I'm Smooth Nzewi. I'm a curator out of New York. So I just wanted to say that I know last year Nkiru reached out to me about this project, and said, I'm working on this. And what I found quite fascinating about it, not because it was COVID, was because the opportunity it affords Africa to join a global conversation through culture and art, and that's what was really very fascinating, the idea of the soft power, and I was not available at that time, and I'm not still available yet, but I will be available at some point. All this is to say that this is really a very significant platform, and I can't wait to see how it continues to grow in promoting the realities and experiences of black people and African people. So thank you.
Thank you. So thanks, everybody. I'm going to come to you, and that will be the last comment or question. But it's really important, just thinking about what's happening with Omicron. See, these things, it's something out of South Africa, so they say. But South Africa just happened to have identified it. But literally, we've locked South Africa out. It's just so easy to lock us out because We haven't actually, I mean, we can also blame the world, but we have to also look at ourselves. Like, we haven't actually told our stories ourselves. And so when somebody else is telling your story for you, that's what's going to happen. It's, you know, forget that Delta happened, forget that, COVID actually came from Wuhan or wherever it came from. Once it's Ebola, once it's in something that has to do with us, it's like suddenly the world has to stop and, you know, we can be locked away. But I think it's for us to actually realize that we have to do something about it, and we can't keep, it's, you know, very nice to say, oh, this is happening, but we have to actually sort of like our global voices speak up, you know, like have people like Hannah, Franklin, Touria, Oti, everybody in this room really is actually a global African, and sort of like tell the stories that we want told for us. I think that's really important, and that's why we're here. So thank you. I'm going to take the last question, comment, and then we'll go back and close.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having and carving out space for this conversation. My name's Elena Mirage. Hey, Touria. And I'm from Brooklyn, and I'm actually the business development manager. I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous. I haven't spoken like this in a long time, but I'm the business development manager for the Bishop Gallery, and we're actually hosting a wonderful exhibition called Our Friend Jean, made up of 22 artworks of Jean-Michel Basquiat. And Franklin, you know, I know a lot of people are familiar with the guys, so please come visit us. We're in Wynwood, and we're bringing Basquiat to the blockchain. So we have an NFT auction happening tomorrow night. And I think this is really exciting times for everyone in the art community. Black art didn't just happen 2 years ago. So, you know, we're all playing our part, and thank you so much once again for hosting this.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So we're going to take final comments from the panel, closing comments, as in like what's next, what's the exciting thing, what's most exciting to you, what's the future looking like, how do we ensure that this trend is not a fad, like, you know, like, okay, next 2 years from now it's over, and like, you know, Oti, you start with you and we can end with Hannah.
Okay, the future. I mean, I feel like, you know, when I think about the future, when I see, you know, what's been happening, you know, recently, in terms of the consciousness of kind of African culture, you know, I still think there's a challenge that exists in terms of accessibility sometimes. You know, some folks and understanding when it comes to like NFTs, you know, for example, or, you know, it's interesting when it comes to that kind of stuff. I mean, if you want to learn about NFTs, crypto, it's like, you know, if Raymond and I speak to our kids, they can break it down perfectly, you know. But the truth is, the stuff is here and it's here to stay. And the interesting thing about, you know, this digitization of art now is that, you know, and also when you think about the, you know, the digitization of currency like Bitcoin, Ethereum, all these things, you know, it's giving people, you know, access to an area where they otherwise necessarily felt like they had been locked out. So in terms of the metaverse, things like that, that stuff is coming, it's here to stay. You know, people are going to own art in the metaverse, they're going to own race teams, they're going to own horses. It's really interesting stuff. But in terms of fine art, etc., you know, I think I do believe that with what you're doing, what we are all doing, I mean, I don't believe this is a fad. I don't think it's like something that's just like for now. I think this is going to, you know, this is the new normal. But I think the challenge for all of us is to institute a way whereby, you know, new collectors are able to enter the game, are able to gain access to work. They feel included. They don't feel like it's something whereby, you know, you have to have a certain amount of, you know, money to buy art. Anybody can enjoy art. So I think that, and to me, that's what the future represents. It's a challenge. It's also an opportunity, but I think it's one that we can certainly solve for.
Well, I think the future is very exciting, at least for contemporary African art, for NFTs, for, you know, the African continent. We see a growth, for sure in all the things that are happening on the continent, like galleries, auctions, cultural platforms. We have exciting galleries based in London opening on the continent, and vice versa, based on the continent opening in Europe, etc. So there's definitely, a stronger ecosystem that is being built, which will help everybody more integrated, more included, in I guess the global narrative around contemporary art. I think also that we are unified, when it comes to art, when we talk about African art, because our voice is stronger. But I think there's definitely going to be I guess a deep dive on Africa as well, like in terms of where we're from, which country we're talking about, I think this is coming as well. I can see that, we might not talk of African art, in general very soon. And that's a good thing, as well. I think people will be even more interested in the singularity and the complexity of all those identity. And that's for me very exciting.
Yeah, I would agree. I just second, and also what Smooth said. I'm excited about what you're doing, and the fact that we will be brought together again in some fashion, and to have a space of communing together. You've heard from some of the people in the audience and OT, and so we are trying to do a little thing here, something that takes into account the fact that our proximity to Africa on one hand, right, across the Atlantic, but also to the Caribbean and to the diaspora is a quite special place. But I'm really interested in seeing the ways in which a project like yours reflects a greater sense of global coming together. And I think there are a lot of forces that are working against us that will empower us to find meaningful ways in which to engage with each other. That's what I'm most excited for. I kind of get it in the back of my head. I can't remember now, but around the time that the pandemic came on, it seemed as though we were all supposed to be in Dakar, if I remember correctly, right? And so I'm excited for those kind of things to happen again. Excited because no matter how much we have come together over the lines of communication digitally, that there's something really powerful that waits us when we are able to come together again physically and to do things like this more often.
Thank you. I'm going to echo a lot of what's already been said. I think, Touria, I look at you and I think those early days when we were starting out and we were thinking, why are we doing this? No one cares, no one's listening, no one's buying. It's because we could see the long-term potential. We could see that there was a need and a potential market out there. Nkiru, you already mentioned something like 1 in 5 people on this planet live on the continent of Africa. I can't even quantify the diaspora beyond that. That is a powerful, powerful group of people, powerful in the marketplace and powerful for dictating where we can take this world. I think we're in a moment right now where I think the word trend or fashion was mentioned earlier. African art is quite trendy. I think there's a danger right now of non-Black and non-African people dictating a little bit where the market is right now. I think we need to look beyond that. The people in this room, I'm looking around at many pioneers in this field who are in it for the long haul. We're all in it for the long haul, and that's going to pay off a huge dividend in the long term. I think we need to look past that kind of immediate fashion and see that this is a market that's not going away. This is not a field that's not going away. If anything, we're only just starting to scratch the surface. There are so many exciting projects on the continent and so many relationships, a lot of which have come out of these digital conversations we've been talking about the last 2 years, relationships between Africa and the diaspora, which will empower African institutions, African artists, African collectors, to the point where we're not separating the two, that we're talking about capitals in Africa being as important art locations as anywhere else in the world.
So thank you. We're going to be rounding up in like 2 minutes. So thank you everybody for being here. There's one thing I did want to say before we end. It just occurred to me a story from one of our events. A woman called Rachel Maia, who is Brazilian, and she was the only Black CEO of a multinational in Brazil, and she's like she was a superstar. And she said that, at least we see each other. And, you know, our experience as black people living on the continent, or black people living in the UK, or black people living in America is so vastly different from the experience of South Americans. And it's one of those things, this is one of the things that we want to sort of like shine the light on, because she said, they don't see us. And it's even worse because you don't see us, we don't see them. And that's one of the things we want to do with Africa Soft Power Project, as in like, should we just see ourselves and empower ourselves, and sort of like, because it's so important that we're like, understanding the story and what makes us, you know, is what makes us strong, and understanding that we're not alone is what also makes us strong. So it's really important. I just wanted to share that story because it's not just about us in this room, it's really about where are people everywhere, because we will be stronger together. That's really something that always, it's sort of stayed with me. And so thank you, everybody. Just a quick, we're going to be in LA in February, and then we're having a flagship, our main thing, in May, and which is around music, it's around finance, which is a huge thing, around cuisine, food, like, you know, all of that stuff in May in Rwanda. So please, you know, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Africa Soft Power, and, you know, connect, just tell us what you want to talk about, the things that are, you know, like you think are really going to be powerful in the next 10 years. It's about getting that story. So when you Google Africa, you don't see, you know, usually you see very hungry looking women with, you know, babies with flies, and then women with 50 babies on their back, and that's some of the things we want to change. We're not saying those things are not true, we're not saying it's not happening, but we're saying that the same thing is happening in Chicago. It's saying the same thing is happening everywhere else. So why are we telling the only bad stories about us? So we want to show stories of you. We want to see you. We want to see everybody, so that we know that the Africa story is actually just sort of like the same diversity everywhere. We have poor people, we have rich people, we have, you know, people who are, like, literally we have everything, same as here, same as everywhere in the world, and not just, like babies with flies, which is what the world wants us to know about. So thank you everybody for being here. We have hors d'oeuvres coming now. There's, I think we have sparkling wine as well. So welcome and thank you, and feel free to mingle and, you know, stay as long as you want. And thank you to our distinguished panel for being here.